very good evening to you and welcome to another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Deon Abrams, and with me on the program this evening live are Professor Clive Thomas and Brother Desmond Trotman. Well, Professor Thomas would have been off the program for quite a while, so I want to welcome you back to Walter Rodney Groundings, Professor Thomas.
Thank you, Deon.
Well, Trotty, I don't have to welcome you. Anyhow, thanks for being here. Well, there are some concerns. Let's look at the budget. With the presence of Professor, we can have some keen analysis of what has been transpiring in Parliament. There are some concerns in relation to what has been happening in Parliament in relation to the budget, in terms of the opposition and their dealings with issues relating to the allocations for the various ministries and so on. Of particular concern would have been the vote in support of the $6 billion allocated to the Guyana Sugar Corporation, GAISUCO. Professor Thomas, what is your opinion in relation to the $6 billion? I know you have written on that issue, you have some concerns, but let's hear those concerns on the television so that people may be aware of.
Yeah, my concerns are very fundamental, but I really don't want to start there, even though I will in my reply mention what they are. I believe that looking at it from the outside, the government has got the opposition tied up in the debate on the budget and making the opposition look very clumsy, very unprofessional, and I would say not very politically advanced. And this is to be regretted because, I mean, most of the ideas and positions that we encourage the opposition to take are in fact articulated by people who support the opposition cause. And I'm unhappy about the way in which they translate that into political action. In that context, I can respond to your question on sugar. Here we have a corporation that has never given to the National Assembly, has never given to the trade union movement, has never given to any of its employees, whether they're a trade union or not, has never given to the public at large a single financial statement since 2009. But that is not all. This corporation incurred a loss of $6 billion Guyana in 2013. And as of the end of 2013, it had an accumulated indebtedness of $91 billion. It had received over the years from both the EU and the government nearly $90 billion already in subsidies. This is a corporation calling out for public scrutiny. And in fact, the calls have been made by portions of the opposition, including myself, that there should be a commission of inquiry and forensic audit of what the corporation has done over the years. 2, there should be a national task force to develop a strategy for sugar, looking forward, I would say, about 20 years from now, 2035. And thirdly, a complete change in the nature of the board of governors running that corporation. Because I'm not happy about either the named members of the corporation over the years on the board or the intended names coming out of the opposition, because they do not seem to me to be able to signify a change in outlook, a change in approach, a change in method to how we deal with sugar in the economy. All this, to my mind, is pure impasse, because the corporation now feels that it is entitled to this money. And the government feels also that the public is entitled to give it this money. And when it does not give it the money, the government is trying to raise the obvious political challenge that it can raise, that you're trying to deny the workers in sugar income to support the sugar industry, when nothing can be further from the truth. We are anxious to see sugar transformed into, that is to use the assets of sugar, transformed into a way that could provide sustainable livelihoods for everybody in sugar. The sugar workers, the estate communities, and to the Guyanese public at large. We don't want a situation where this government gives $91 billion over the years as subsidies to sugar, so they could produce sugar and sell it cheap overseas. Because when they do that, they're subsidizing overseas consumers of our sugar. Poor Guyana is now subsidizing consumers in Europe. That is the net effect of what the government is doing, if you think about it. If we're selling the sugar cheaper than the cost of production, and the government is covering the distance, the difference, who is benefiting? Not the Guyanese. The Guyanese workers are benefiting, but that is incidental to the greater benefit that the consumers of our sugar gets in Europe. And the opposition will not make this point. Does not seem to want to take it on, I don't know why. Which means that they have a different approach to the discussion of the industry within the parliament. They should not make the sugar workers the object of their distress or dissatisfaction. They should focus it where it lies, and that is on the government and the managers of the industry. And that is where they should focus it. And to be able to focus it, you have to bring out and highlight all these contradictions so that you will show that the workers themselves are losing out on what they think is a benefit. That the government is conning them, just as how it is conning the rest of the country. But the sugar workers that are wrong do not have this conception of what is happening. The political parties in the opposition have failed to convince the population at large, and to fail to convince sugar workers about the nature of the system in which they find themselves. And that is why it is so easy for the government to manipulate them, develop a situation where they become the enemies, as the government is trying to paint it, of the sugar workers. And that is where I feel that we've really fallen down on our politics. I'm sorry it took such a long time,
Okay,
but I want to make that point.
Your points are of major importance. But Brother TROTMAN, Professor made an important point at the beginning of his presentation. He's saying that he has concerns with the way the opposition is dealing with the issues related to the budget. And the fact is that the government seems to be winning in all aspects of the debate in relation to the budget. As a parliamentarian of APNU, what is your perception, your view in terms of that, opinion expressed by Professor Thomas?
Well, I tend to agree with what Professor Thomas is saying. Personally, when we looked at the Ministry of Agriculture's estimates, we had a certain approach in mind, because we felt that if there was no justification for the request for the subvention, that the subvention will not have been approved. And I do believe that in spite of the fact that Minister Ramsamy attempted to justify his request, that it wasn't satisfactorily addressed. But one of the things that happened, and here's where I believe that the opposition really bowed to pressure, because on the day when we looked at the estimates, what the government did was to mobilize broad-down sugar workers, and their particular focus was on the AFC. They felt that if it is that they could intimidate the AFC, then the AFC was likely not to support not to vote against the request, and so that they attacked Moses Nakamutu particularly, very personally. It was a terrible terrible set of abuse which they directed against him. They of course sought to put it in a racial context, accuse him of all manners of things, and I think that they succeeded. However, I felt that the APNU should have maintained the position which we had from the inception, and that was that in the absence of clear-cut reasons, for clearly defined reasons for this subvention, that we should have said no. And I really felt very disappointed that we, instead of voting no and to put our position, make our position very clear, that we remain silent when it is that the vote is called.
But I think the problem, in a sense, goes further. After the ruling of the Chief Justice, it is clear that the politics of the budget cannot proceed as it was proceeding before. If we cannot cut line items, then
What transpired there, the station was hit by a blackout. I don't know whether it was a purposeful act or not, but we can't, underestimate what happens in this country. Well, Professor Thomas, Brother Trotman said that he had hoped that we left off where Brother Trotman had pointed out that he had hoped that the APNU would have held its position of not supporting the $6 billion or the allocation for the Ministry of Agriculture. And but because of the pressures that would have been brought by the presence of the sugar workers, that they went along with the Alliance for Change and supported the allocation. And you were making a point that there is some other side that we needed to look at in dealing with that issue.
Before Professor Thomas responds, let me just say,
Speak up a bit, Rodney.
let me just say that what I indicated was that instead of voting no, as I believe that we should have, that we remain silent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the point that I really wanted to make is that the nature of the politics of the budget has changed fundamentally. From the moment its Chief Justice gave a ruling that says the Parliament has no authority to cut line items, they had to treat the budget as one, as a whole. They could only reject or accept it. The politics of the budget changed. And it is incumbent, therefore, the parties to strategize how they're going to move forward in such a situation. It is very easy in that context for the government to link line items, to create political situations that are uncomfortable for the opposition. They have to know that will happen. So what they have to do is not engage the government on their own terms, but to challenge the whole budgetary process. And that is what I think, where they think we should have started. So the approach to the budget is not now an approach trying to argue within the context of the colonially structured budget arguments that we become familiar with and that we continue here. We try to restructure the whole notion of what the budget represents in the performance and governance of the country, the financing of the country, and to develop an onslaught on the government in relation to that. So the battles have to be fought both in the Parliament for that and outside the Parliament. So I believe that we should, once we succumb to the parliamentary process as given with that ruling, we cannot win. We can only lose. So all the issues that we have raised in the past about how the time between the budget reading and the budget debates is too short, as we made time immemorial, all these things we should use to drive a wedge into the budget process and to prevent the budget from going ahead. As a budget, we should raise the fact of all these false statistics that the government is using in the presentation of the budget. We should challenge it at its core. So the battle becomes not a battle for particular line items because we've already lost that, but a battle over the whole nature of the budgetary process. And I'm extremely disappointed that we did not think of approaching the struggle in that particular way. And of course, we can only sit on the outside and wish that we could have done better, because I'm not in a position to influence the direction of any decision making about strategy and how to deal with the budget in Parliament. But I would imagine from the things that I've read and that have been written, that I myself have contributed to, that was the logical outcome of the way in which the government should go ahead. We shouldn't be coming in 2040 to talk about parallel treasuries. We've already established that these people run slush funds. We've characterized it as such for 3 years now. The question is, do you bring all these things together and say, look, we're not letting the budget pass as it is unless we play a part in its formulation, its construction, and meet the challenge at that level. But once you concede, let the government go ahead and write the budget and then we can act on it. You're playing into the hands of what the Chief Justice has done. And that is to create a situation in which the legislature has no capacity to influence the outcome of the budget other than its entire rejection. Well, if that's the outcome, that you have the alternative, then you should reject it at the level of process and not at the level of the funding of the budget. For example, we've made this point time and time again in this program I have, that when the government boasts it spends $220 billion in this year's budget expenditure, this money is not manna from heaven. It means it takes $220 billion from us. The opposition fails to put that sort of argument to the public, so the public feels that this money the government is spending, they get as manna from heaven. They don't realize it's taxes or money the government is borrowing or the printing that is generating this expenditure. We pay for what the government spends. So the level of resistance has to be at whether we think that this government is permitted to take 220 billion Guyana dollars for the population at large. And that's where we have to mount the challenge. We have to keep mounting it, be insistent about it, and try to develop a strategy to get the people to understand what is taking place in the economy. 40% of this economy is a phantom economy, organized crime. We have to keep these things to the forefront of the people. They have to have a vision of this economy in which the government can't come and play politics and say they have $1.1 billion for Amranium fund and you're trying to cut it, when they themselves probably got several billion in the pocket stashed away. The growing inequality in the country everywhere, the mansions that are going up, people that work for $70,000 a month, as I see in the papers recently, owning $34 and $35 billion land and housing. These things have to be brought to the people and become part of the struggle to go forward. You can't fight now on the terms or the grounds that have been swept away or from under your feet. And that is where I think that the fundamental mistake lies.
Deon, before you go any further, I endorse completely what Professor Thomas has said. And I want to underscore the importance of a point that he has made, because I do believe, in fact, week after week we come on this program, we're saying it, and now it is that you see the importance of what is it we've been saying. The particular point that I'm referring to is the one which Professor Thomas made when he said that the struggle can't be limited only to Parliament, that it has to take place both inside and outside of Parliament. We see, we have been calling on persons to come out in support of the opposition forces, come out outside of Parliament and lend us your support, because this is extremely important. While it may be a little late now at this juncture, there's still other battles to be fought. And we need, as a person who sits in Parliament, we need the support of our people outside of Parliament in order to ensure that we can win the victories that we have set out to win. Because we saw the way in which the opposition allowed itself to be intimidated by the government's action in relation to bringing out the sugar workers. We have to be able to counter that kind of behavior. And we have to be able to depend on our supporters to be outside of Parliament and standing firm with us as we can carry on the work inside of Parliament. Because if we don't, there's a real likelihood that we will be losing more battles inside of Parliament. So I want to use this opportunity at this particular point in time to call on people from tomorrow, make yourself available, come every day until when the budget discussions are over. Come outside of Parliament and lend us your support. Come out in your hundreds, in your thousands maybe, and lend us your support, because we need it, and we need your support if it is that we're going to be winning those battles that we've set out.
But I'm concerned about one point that Professor made. He said that he was in no position to influence what the opposition does. Considering the fact that the APNU is a partnership, I'm surprised that such a statement would be coming from Professor Thomas. What is the relationship existing among these parties to the extent that Professor can say that he has no influence in terms of what happens?
Well, there are formal and informal structures. for getting your influence felt in such a situation. But I'm not one that is willing to go and try to meet people informally to tell them what they should do, because I'm not a deal maker. I write and I state my opinions. I'm writing on sugar after discussion with a number of people about what's the next best topic to write on. I started to write from January, so everything I have to say about how we should approach sugar has been said in the articles that I write every day, week. But I'm convinced that 99% of the people that intended to read it do not read it. But I know I have a sustained audience from persons outside of Guyana who find it very interesting and important for them as their understanding of these types of industries and these types of circumstances we have in Guyana. So I do it largely for their benefit and for my edification too, because I learn from trying to write and research in these industries. Most of what I know about sugar has been because of my deliberate attempt to write and research in it. So from that point of view, that is where my influence is probably minimal. There were a couple of structures that maybe were not working to allow me to discuss a way to approach the budget in any detailed way. But that was a problem of practicality. It had nothing to do with a systematic attempt to avoid giving me an audience. But the other thing I come to feel is that many people have urged upon me that there's a deliberate attempt almost to avoid having to deal with issues I raise. I don't want to have to see that in the program, but for the first time I'm beginning to wonder if that might conceivably be true. I never gave it any credence before, because all these things that we are suddenly discovering, we were writing, we talking about as if we didn't know they exist. I've sent in by email to persons in the party's leadership for them to have possession of. These are not secret information. If you look at today's papers, you can't be writing now and say you don't know what the debt is. The debt is about 40 billion when it's 91 billion. When I be supplying it to you every week, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, but
Absolutely ridiculous.
okay. So, all right.
So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, including laziness. The people who are in the leadership position do not do their homework.
But one of
And
the,
you can't run a country or run an opposition without systematic work. There's something just like the government. The government doesn't allow its officials and technicians to present anything. A minister gets up and talks, and he doesn't know what he or she doesn't know what they're talking about. And it comes through clearly to anybody who's a professional that they're dancing lightly in their hot coals of the subject that they're dealing with. They don't comprehend what they're really saying. So they make all sorts of ridiculous statements. Every year, the minister goes to Parliament of Agriculture, no matter who he is, and says this will be the turnaround year for sugar. How often do you have to hear them say that for you not to realize that they're going to come back and tell you the same thing? How can you take their word for it when you've got documented how many times they've said that we will be producing 450,000 tons of sugar by 2014? More than 2014 times. And you can still be willing to give them a chance to say, you can see what they're going to do. They've always come and said what you expect them to say.
well, you see, my concern is that our politics seem not to be focused on the evidence that is there to bear out whatever decisions are made. It seems only to play to the whole idea of what the support, whether we get the support or whether we don't get the support.
And that is what the government is doing with the budget. The government didn't care with the facts. The government getting a lot of support, and that's the way they're going to go. Maybe in the rest of the Caribbean, there's a lot more loyalty to truth and information and the validity of data and to objective evidence and so on. There's a lot more validity to that. But that's an elevated political culture. In this one here, it's depraved. So nobody cares if they're telling a blanket lie to you and tomorrow something else happens. Lying is a norm. so that they do not care. They would never, they don't mind putting it in writing or in speech.
But what about the element of race that they've been playing with Gaisuko?
Well, that's easy to do. That's very easy to do. Because the obvious division that exists, and if you want to be put in a position where it seems that you're objecting to funds going to sugar, then they can twist it and turn to say you're objecting to funds going to
A particular race.
to a particular race. And that's a failing on the part of those who are objecting, because they've not put across their case, which is a case for the sugar workers. The sugar workers don't want their hard-earned taxes, which is what finances this government, to be used to subsidize people overseas to consume Guyana sugar. Think about it. The sugar worker would be happy to know that we're producing sugar at 39 cents per pound, selling it for 17 cents in the world market, and that the government will use the taxes to pay the corporation to be able to continue doing that. No sugar worker would be happy with that in no part of the world. No worker would. So we have a lot of natural allies in the industry. Once we keep their consciousness up, and once we directly communicate to them the nature of the predicament that they face and all of us face, that is the art of politics, and that is some of the politics that I know, where we try to develop the consciousness of the working people, of the masses in general, so they come to know what their best interests are like. So they can't be bamboozled by somebody telling you, come down and vote again and talk to the Indian members of the AFC and pay PNU, because if you do that, you're going to embarrass them and they might vote and give you the money.
But the other point is, apart from what you have said, we have the situation where, okay, the budget would have been read, they would have used this racist idea to fester and to get the sugar workers to come out and to rally, and you're saying that they need education.
But education can't be done overnight.
Overnight.
That's why I'm saying you're in Parliament with the minority, with the majority, since 2011. All these things, all the key constituencies, ought to be made informed and constant offensive, proactive propaganda to advise them of their interests. It's a long time we fighting to win the battle for the way in which the people see the economy is functioning. We talk about this program regularly.
Yes.
99% of the battle for a country is won by the way in which people view the country itself. Once you get that, everything slips into place. But if the government manages to convince them that they're doing the best to help them, and all that is happening is the opposition is trying to sabotage the government, and that is the worldview, then nothing you can do will be able to penetrate that.
But my concern is in the long term, because every time the minister or the Gaisuko makes a projection for production, for the either a crop or for the annual production, the targets are never reached. They keep going down all the time.
Yeah, but what they do is every year, they start with one target. Then when they realize the target is not going to be met, they keep reducing the target itself.
Right.
That is why I never start with a current target. I start with the initial target given any year. And then if you trace that out, you'll see, even when they're adjusting it every 2-3 months, you find that at the end it's still fall short of that.
But the sugar worker, if this trend continues, you're saying that the sugar is being produced at 39 cents, US cents.
39.34 cents a pound,
Right.
I can tell you
And
that
they're
categorically.
selling it,
And the present world market price is less than 70 cents.
which
That was yesterday.
which means that we're not making a profit. We're
Not
selling-
making a
right.
profit. The companies making a loss,
Mhm.
but the government is subsidizing it.
Subsidizing.
Right.
And they come into feel that that subsidy is an entitlement. Because now the government is feeling if you don't give it to them, it shows you sabotaging sugar workers.
But the degradation of the company, if it continues over the next 5-6 years, it means therefore that the subsidy has to increase.
Well, it depends on the scale of the losses. But what in fact it means is that the corporation, instead of being a commercial entity, becomes a welfare agency for the constituents of the PPPC. And they're happy with using your taxpaying money, my taxpaying money, the sugar workers' taxpaying money, to continue doing that if they can win them political support. That's the nexus that has been created, and this is what the opposition got to fight against. And they can only win that battle by convincing the sugar workers of the predicament they find themselves in. GAU is now calling for all the money that the EU gave to the government to be given to the sugar corporation.
For they gave 36,000 US.
No, they gave about 26 billion euros so far, yeah.
And that's since 2000 and
since 2006, it's
six to seven, they started doling out this money, and the Gaisuko has not been benefiting from that money as far as we understand.
Initially, most of the money was given to Gaisuko.
Yeah.
But what happened in the later years is the government convinced them, and many Europeans would accept the view, many trade specialists and aid specialists would believe that it is more efficient to give the money to the government for them to decide what is best than to give it to a corporation, because they won't have the national interest in front of them. But that is for normal government. It's not for a government like this one, locked in a dialectical relationship to the sugar workers that makes them want to convert the sugar workers into a dependent, sycophantic constituency of political supporters. So what they think is a normal commercial transaction or investment transaction that they're undertaking here is financing a nefarious underdevelopment of the whole sugar community. Be right about it. I don't get no support because the government doesn't want to tell the EU that. They don't have any interest in telling them that. And the EU behaves as if this is not a matter of their concern. They're committed to giving the government money, and they give it. And people come here from the EU to find out what is happening. They come to see me, and they say when they ask the EU if anybody in Guyana has any interest in sugar or writing on sugar, the EU tells them no. There's not a single Guyanese interested in sugar or writing on sugar. One guy told me that. They've never ever written or sent a communication to me, even sent the documents. I have to go and seek them online. You would imagine the articles might have evoked some comment, some private call for an interview. Never once. And they've been going on now for years. That's the nature of what we have to fight against.
It's really pathetic. But what, apart from what you would have said, the line that the opposition should take, we have the complex situation. There's a one-seat majority, and then from what would have resulted in the sugar fiasco is that the opposition as a bloc seem not to be able to, in cases of emergency, like what would have transpired when the sugar workers turned up, to come to a point of agreement.
Yeah, that's
we saw that too when the trade union, the vote for the subvention, the Critical Labor College subvention would have occurred, where one politician said, this is our bill, and y'all ain't got any right, trying to change our position in relation to that. And then you had the fallout from that. So how do we deal with that dynamic, this relationship that this fragile opposition really should have in trying to move the interest of the people forward?
Well, I think it's a very grave limitation. And I wouldn't want to come here and pretend that it's not serious. It's a very fundamental limitation because the parties see themselves in different ways. Their politics are different. As I believe, and I've said it before, I think the other party in the opposition has been founded in opportunism because of the way in which they are formed, and they're only likely to behave in opportunistic ways. That is my belief. If they behave otherwise, I'm happy and be surprised. Just as how I believe that this government is a minority government, but will never ever yield to anything to the majority in the legislature. That's their false line of principle. We must never ever concede anything So anybody who goes in for dealing with them and comes out believing that they've conceded something is up for a mistake. It happened in Region 12. It happened in so many things. Even with the
Region
sugar.
10.
Region 10.
Region 10, sorry. Region 10. But it's so many things has happened. The government would never ever concede anything to this opposition. So anytime the opposition believes they want something from the government, they're fooling themselves. They're in for a double cross. There are individuals cases too where they say people are backpedaling on their agreements with them. That have happened in that parliament. You probably heard about some even recently.
Yeah.
But that shows the naivety, I believe, of the persons who deal with them to believe that they never ever concede anything. That's a fundamental principle on which they work, that we should never ever concede anything to the opposition. So there's no give and thrust.
But the final thing on Gaisuko, the sugar workers themselves, the progression suggests that the industry is going to continue to be on a decline, and eventually that it may reach an area where it becomes so unsustainable if the government continues down the road that it is going, that the government itself will find itself in a bind in terms of what they say to the workers and what they do in relation to the industry.
Yeah, but a big fear of any government, any PPP government, is given this tendency for the industry to be unsustainable, is not to be the president that is ruling at the time of its collapse. Because that president, given the way the politics of the sugar has developed, will be in perpetual dislike and distrust on the part of the PPP. So that every president faces a real risk. Do we take the chance now and try to reconstruct and reconfigure the industry before it's too late? Or do we allow it to collapse in our hands and we become blamed for what has happened? Because the whole situation is set up for blaming somebody. So it takes a lot of courage, a lot of political courage to decide how you're going to handle this particular movement. That is what you want. And the same way the opposition has to have political courage about how they're going to handle this budget situation, the government too has to have courage about how it's going to go forward. Because I don't think President Ramata would want to be the president that is in charge when sugar ultimately collapses. So he has a vested interest in trying to find some solution, and therefore they have to find a means of dialoguing on that issue with him. That would be my part of my strategy.
But he don't want to be seen as the person under who the industry has finally collapsed, even though he has been sitting on the board for all of those years while it is that the industry was collapsing. I mean, it's a piece of irony that situation exists. But more and more, as I listen to Professor Thomas here this afternoon, more and more my position is reinforced about what is it the opposition needs to do. Because I do believe, like you do, and like Professor Thomas has said, that it's extremely difficult in a situation where it is that we have just a one-seat majority for us to be able to hold fast to principal positions. Bearing in mind that, both groups, each group has its own agenda. And the ease in which it is that pressure could be brought to bear on one side is frightening. And I do believe that here's where it is that we really need the people on our side in order to win positions. Because I think that when you look at the PPP's behavior in the past, that the PPP only understands force as an instrument, that when force is used against them as an instrument of leverage, that is when it is that they tend to buckle under pressure.
By force, you mean political
force? Political force. And I think that we have to recognize, we in the APNU must recognize that is the way for us to go. We can't continue believing that we are going to achieve our objectives by confining the struggle into Parliament. because that's where the government wants you to be. They want you to be in Parliament, pretending as if it is that they're concerned about agreements and all those things, and in actual fact, they're not. All they're concerned about is holding fast the power, and they're going to use you as much as possible to hold out to this power structure. And we have to be able to do what is it we must do in order to we feed them. Look, this letter is a letter written by Irfan Ali to communities. In fact, what he's doing is using the money, the local government funds, in order to influence communities to stand behind the PPP. It's a little longish letter, and I can't read it today, but certainly I will read it next week when the program is on. But we have to understand what is happening. Here it is that the PPP is doing everything that they believe they can do in order to hold on to power. And we're not doing what is it we're supposed to do in order to leverage power away from them, from out of their clutches. And, it's really disappointing when it is that
we can't be vexed with them for doing that.
For doing that.
Because that's their right as a party.
Yeah.
They're entitled to do that. As long as they pursue democratic principles, we might object to the culture that allow them to get into these naked abuses, but that's their entitlement. And therefore, my final position is, I know we run out of time, is that if they are prepared to rig the rules of the parliamentary budget debates, that we should think of fighting for the budget in a different arena. We should start off by trying to engage the entire process as the basis for challenge and try to develop an alternative strategy to deal with that. I think we need to put our brains together to see what might be the best approach, and that is what I would urge.
Yeah, but the fact that these line items, that they lump everything in one, as because of the nature of the ruling.
They lump certain things together.
Right, yeah.
And put them in one.
Put them in one, right? Now, the Amerindians, their allocations would have been cut because the ministry's rights would not have been approved. And the government has been using this. They've put out full-page advertisements in the newspapers.
And they were the television, saturated
right,
television.
So to make it appear that the opposition is not in support of works within the Amerindian communities. I know that the APNU would have been to some of the regions on a move to get them aware of what is transpiring. And many Amerindians, I spoke to one guy yesterday, and he said that lots of Amerindians don't trust the government in terms of what they've promised them and what they actually do. Brother Trotman, do you envisage APNU going back to these communities to have them again informed on what would have transpired in Parliament and to make them aware that APNU does have their interests at heart?
Well, I have no doubt that the APNU must do that. It must do that. Already, the difficulty for us is that we don't control the airwaves, because the parliamentarians, the Amerindian parliamentarians, which represent both the APNU and the Alliance for Change, actually held, I know at least one joint press conference where they were at pains to explain why it is they went in the direction that they went to. But, very little or nothing at all has been heard about that. So that the fact of the matter is that we have to ensure that we move expeditiously into those communities to explain to people exactly what is going on. They have the issue of the LCDS coming up for consideration under the Office of the President budget, and that again, that is lumped among other things. And the whole idea, as Professor Thomas has been explaining, is to ensure that we can't cut, because we can't cut line items. So that we have to expect that they will be bringing down, they will go to Amerindian communities, mobilize and bring down a lot of Amerindians in order to stand outside the Parliament to support the budget for the Office of the President, just to ensure that the LCDS is approved. We have to recognize what is afoot, And we have to be able to, our supporters in Georgetown and wherever they are, must be able to come out and lend your support, lend your voices to the voice of the opposition in Parliament so that we could do what is it.
Yeah, but in such an instance, you don't want two sides shouting down each other. What you need is some kind of the two sides trying to engage. The people who are protesting, somebody tries to explain to them, well, look, this is the nature of the issue. And because normally what happens is that you have one set of people. They bring these people down. They're totally unaware of, in some instances, of what really is happening. And so they have one perception in their mind. There are those who come, basically like when they were protesting for the, what was it? Recently they took a set of youngsters outside Parliament and they had them there pass the anti-money laundering bill. And a lot of them really didn't even know what they're out there protesting about. Right? So you got to educate even the people that sometimes they pay to put out there so that everybody understands that even if they're protesting, because some of them are paid, that within their hearts, they know that the issue that they're fighting is not a righteous one. You understand?
As a position taken by some sugar workers who gave interviews after the protest was over and made it very clear that they support the opposition's positions. They support the opposition positions in relation to the stand that it took on the sugar issues. But I agree with you, Deon, that you don't want this thing to be reduced to a mere shouting match. But what we don't want is for one side, the government alone have supporters outside there putting pressure on the opposition, and the opposition don't have any support putting pressure on the government. Okay. And I think that is what is, for me, that is desirable. And I make no apology for that.
Yeah, I see what you need is for the opposition to want something sufficiently badly coming out of the budget as to motivate their people to be there. You can't just say come out and support our party as they fight against the budget. You must have something you want. Like, for example, we want to reduce VAT to 10%, and we can pass a private member's bill to do that. Attack the budget where it's weakest. It has to raise taxes. So if you set your sights in that and you try to mobilize in that, let the government go ahead and mobilize in the expenditure. We can mobilize on the taxes that you have to raise. And that's the counterforce they need to find. But they don't have any discussion about it. So I don't know what's the point of giving them that advice.
I don't know how much.
That's where you have to start. You have to bring people there and say, look, we want a 10% VAT. Bring out 50,000 people demanding that. That's the way to counter what is happening.
Yep. All right. Well,
you have to be proactive and forceful. Yeah. You have to have an idea, something for people to come and fight for. They can't just come and fight to defend you from being lambasted by the government.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are several aspects of the budget that I would like to touch on. I was reading Lucas's business page today, and it's very interesting what he has to say. Well, we don't have the time to deal with it. The lights are already on. But the Ministry of Education has, we talked about this last week, decided that it will not give teachers any kind of increase to make them comfortable. The people's income in relation to their expenditure, as would have been pointed out by Lucas today, continues to, the gap between income and expenditure continues to widen. And they are now making it appear that they're doing something by offering $10,000 per child who is in school. Now, how far-reaching is that, and how effective will that be in relation to...
See, opposition has a lot of things to fight for. For example, at the university is ripe for a strike now. We haven't been paid, I haven't been paid my allowances. Everybody in UG has UG owing them some sort of money connected to their contract at this point in time. That we're taking them to court. There's a ripe situation where there's an active need, and you have active people who engage in a fight for improving their livelihoods that they can win support for and highlight some of the predicaments in higher education. But that is not happening. There's like a disconnect, yet they have members on the board. Like a disconnect between what is taking place there and what is taking place in the halls of the party.
You know, my concern really is with the fact that they seem not to want to address the problem in any real way. That they believe that it's just a means of, like, I don't know how they see it, that gratification or, you know, short term. And they believe that people will be captured by these moves. I mean, is it that the populace is so backward that they will see $10,000 as a means of making them feel happy for the moment and forget all their troubles?
I think when people are particularly poor, any sort of money is attractive. That's what I basically believe.
And they counted on that.
Yeah.
They counted on that.
A poor person can't turn down $10,000.
No, I don't expect them to.
I can't turn it down. So much more a poor person, they can't turn it down.
But it's bad politics because, like you said, it's good politics for them.
For them, yeah.
But bad for the people who have to
receive.
receive.
A culture of
Right.
dependency and so on, mendicancy and that type of thing.
Because when you look at the fact that, okay, well, I see the time is on me, so I'm going to have to tie up here, and we will have to continue this discussion. But Professor Thomas, I want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure having you as usual. Your ideas were pretty stimulating, Brother Trotman. You two would have highlighted a number of important issues as relates to the activity of the APNU in Parliament. To the people out there, it's been a pleasure being with you. We look forward to being with you next week, same time, same channel, for another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. Do have a good night.